On the night of February 9th, 2004, a 21-year-old nursing student named Maura Murray vanished along a rural stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Moments before her disappearance, she had been in a single-vehicle accident. Her Saturn sedan struck a snowbank near a neighbor's home. A passing bus driver offered help. She declined. Police arrived within minutes, and she was gone. No footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, no confirmed sightings ever since. What followed was a search that gripped the nation, a case fueled by online sleuths, family heartbreak, and a list of unanswered questions that only grew longer with time. Was it a planned escape, a random abduction, or something more complicated? Tonight, we begin our multi-part journey into one of the most enduring mysteries of the 21st century. This is the story of Maura Murray, and this is Dark Dialogue. You hear a lot of stories in this line of work. Cases that linger for weeks, cases that go cold for years, but some never go quiet. The story of Maura Murray is one of those. She wasn't famous. She wasn't the daughter of a governor or Hollywood star. She was just a 21-year-old college student with finals on the horizon, a few personal struggles behind her, and, at least from the outside, a life that was still coming together. Then one winter night, in the middle of New Hampshire's White Mountains, she disappeared. Not in a dense city, not in the woods, right next to the road. For a few minutes, people saw her, a neighbor, a bus driver, and then nothing. In the time it takes to boil a cup of tea, she was gone. Since then, Maura's name has become a fixture in true crime forums, cold case blogs, Reddit threads, YouTube rabbit holes, and search parties that returned with more questions than answers. Her case was one of the first to go viral online. Before podcasts got big, before algorithm-fed TikTok videos, before everyone had a camera in their pocket. But there's a danger to all that noise. The more times a story is repeated, the more twisted it can become. Facts get blurred, leads become rumors, and people forget there was a person behind the puzzle. So tonight, we're going back to the beginning, not to the crash, not to the theories, but to Maura herself. Who was she? Where did she come from? And what might have led her to that scratch of icy road in the first place? We're going to retrace her steps, from her childhood in Massachusetts to her driven years at West Point, to her transfer to UMass Amherst, to the decisions, some deliberate, some mysterious, that put her on Route 112 that night. Because you can't understand a disappearance until you understand the person. And Maura Murray was more than her last moments. She was layered, private, strong-willed, and in many ways, painfully human. We'll talk about the contradictions, the choices that didn't make sense, the oddities that got magnified in hindsight, the pressure of being a high achiever holding her world together with one hand while quietly unraveling with the other. And yes, we'll talk about what happened on February 9th, 2004. The phone calls, the packed bags, the wine, the emails, the lies, the truths, and everything in between. Then we'll list every theory, just the outlines for now. No deep dives yet. That comes later. This is going to be a long road, and we're going to walk every mile of it. Not because the internet needs another take, but because a family still doesn't have answers, and because someone, somewhere, knows something. This is Dark Dialogue, and this is part 1 of our series on Maura Murray. Hey Angela, how's it going tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How's work?
Work is work.
Yeah.
I'm glad it's done today.
So, I gotta get cut on again.
I'm not excited about that.
Don't know what kind of effect that's gonna have on this show. I'll do my best from recovery, but things might slow down a little bit.
I do think we should record an episode while you're on painkillers, because that might be awesome.
Yeah, well, we could probably do that.
It may not make it to publishing, but it might be awesome.
Yeah, we can give it a try. I'm sure I'll be on some. But anyway, we ready to dive into this case?
I am ready.
All right. So this is one of those cases that just sits with you. It stays in your head long after you walk away. Maura Murray isn't just a cold case. She's a modern mystery. And the more you study it, the more tangled it becomes.
Exactly. And it's one of those few cases where everything is a clue and nothing is a clue at the same time. Every step she took in those final days seems both deliberate and very confusing.
Yes. And that's part of what makes it so damn hard to cover. You've got to resist the urge to jump straight to speculation. You have to dig through decades of coverage, blogs, forums, police reports, family interviews, and half-truths just to piece together what actually is confirmed. You know, I mean, we were doing Chance's case, and there's like nothing, no information. And then you do a case like Maura Murray's, and there's so much. You're in like information overload, and you got to figure out, okay, so what here is actually something, and what's just garbage that we need to throw away.
Exactly. That's difficult.
It sucks.
And I mean, the way the internet turned Maura's case into a digital campfire story, and people are treating it like folklore, forgetting that it was real. Her family's out there still searching and still hurting.
Right. So that's why we're taking this one down in multiple parts. We're not just doing a highlight reel. We're going deep. Tonight we're going to focus on Maura's life before she vanished, her childhood education, her military training, transfers, and the days leading up to February 9th, 2004.
And of course, we'll also walk through what happened that night, just the timeline for now, and then we'll go over the major theories, John's favorite part, without diving into each one just yet.
For those that are new to this case, and Angela, you were before we started digging into this, right?
Yeah, I was.
So Maura Murray was a 21-year-old nursing student at UMass Amherst. On the evening of February 9th, 2004, she was in a single vehicle car crash on a remote stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. A passing bus driver stopped and spoke to her. Police arrived minutes later, but Maura was already gone.
With no signs of a struggle and no confirmed sightings, no confirmed evidence that she left the area on foot, and no reliable witness who saw her beyond that stretch of road.
And since that night, the case has remained one of the most puzzling unsolved disappearances in modern history. And it's inspired everything from intense grassroots investigations to full-blown internet conspiracies.
And while we'll get into all that eventually, tonight we want to pull things back to what matters the most, the person. Because before she became a headline, Maura was someone's daughter. She was a sister. She was a driven, intelligent woman navigating a lot more pressure than most of us knew at the time.
Yeah. You'll hear about her time at West Point, the reasons she left, her struggles, and her resilience at UMass. And what we know about her mental state, her goals, her relationships, and the moments that may have pointed to what happened next.
And I will also be walking us through the towns and schools that shaped Maura's life, from Hanson, Massachusetts to Fort Putnam, overlooking the Hudson River, the snowy foothills of Haverhill, New Hampshire.
This is going to be a heavy one. There's no quick conclusion, no perfect theory, just a trail of facts and people trying to make sense of it all. But we promise we will treat Maura's story with the depth, the dignity, and the discipline that it deserves.
And whether you followed this case for years or you're just now hearing it for the first time, we're honored to have you with us.
So let's begin with the place where the story ends, a quiet, snowy town on the edge of the White Mountains. So, Angela, I think you dug up some location information for us, didn't you?
It's the quizzical way you always say my name. Absolutely, I did. So let's start where Maura's story ends, or rather where it left investigators. What is it if I can't mispronounce a word?
Exactly.
Come on. Where it left investigators with more questions than answers. So as a nod to the Abenaki people, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, people who use the area for agriculture, Haverhill was originally called Lower Kuwas, meaning place of pines. It was officially incorporated in 1763 by Governor Benning Wentworth, and later became the county seat of Grafton County in 1773. So 10 years. 10 years. Back then, it was the final stop on the Old Province Road, a colonial route that connected northern settlements to the New Hampshire seacoast. That strategic location made it a key trading hub in its early days. One of the standout landmarks in the area is the Haverhill Bath Covered Bridge, built in 1829 by the towns of Bath and Haverhill. A little bit obvious there. Its cost was around $2,400 to construct, which is roughly $78,000 in today's money.
It's a little bit of inflation there.
Just a tad, but, in the 1700s.
Right.
Or 1800s. And it remains one of the oldest covered bridges in the county, a quiet but enduring reminder of the region.
Country.
In the country? Oh, that's true. There is an R in there. Here I go. So today, Haverhill... Why is that so hard to say?
I don't know.
Anyway, today, Haverhill is a small, tight-knit town, rich in history, and surrounded by stunning natural landscapes. Population in 1790 was just 552 people, and even by the 2020 census, it had grown to only about 4,585 people. So we did not boom here like some of the other places. The town prides itself on its quiet rural lifestyle and strong community values. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the silence of a winter night can stretch across miles of frozen fields and forested hills. Each year, Haverhill hosted... Oh, I did it right! Each year, Haverhill... I'm sorry, guys. I was very excited there for a moment. You celebrate the little things. Life's short. Each year, Haverhill hosts events that show off the community spirit. The North Haverhill Fairs, I almost messed it up again, Old Home Day, and their annual Christmas parade, complete with floats and fire trucks draped in garland. It's these kinds of small town traditions that makes places like Haverhill feel almost timeless. And for those who enjoy trivia, because we always do, here is a random fact that might surprise you. The Haverhill Library Association reportedly holds over 18,000 books and offers access to 22 licensed databases.
I don't know how that compares to a normal library.
I don't know, but they were very excited about it.
Yeah.
As of May 2025, the town had a resident to sex offender ratio of approximately 939 to 1.
Huh.
That's well below the state average for New Hampshire. And one practical detail that actually matters a lot in this case, cell phone reception in the area can be downright terrible, especially along Route 112, where Maura's car was found.
Yeah, that's a big one. Sounds like Wyoming.
Right.
In fact, that patchy service along Route 112, especially in 2004, was a major obstacle for everyone involved in the search.
That's exactly right. And it's worth pointing out that Route 112 was not your average back road. It's a twisting 2-lane highway carved through the White Mountains with steep embankments, few streetlights, and dense pine forest on either side. It sounds beautiful, however.
It is beautiful.
Knowing what we know, in February, the banks are packed with snow, and visibility can drop dramatically, even without a storm. Haverhill's crash site, located near what's known locally as the Weathered Barn Corner, lies just east of the small village of Woodsville, population about 1,200. Woodsville is technically a part of Haverhill, but it has its own distinct vibe. It's where you'll find a local high school, a smattering of stores, and a 4-officer police department that initially responded to Maura's disappearance.
So, just to paint the picture here, you've got a young woman who crashes her car on a dark, isolated stretch of highway in below freezing temperatures with no working phone and no lights except maybe those of the houses off in the distance. And then she's gone.
Exactly. The setting itself almost works against any quick resolution. And that remoteness wasn't new to Maura. She grew up in Hanson, Massachusetts, which, while suburban, has its own quiet corners.
So let's talk about that, where Maura came from.
Sure thing, John.
Thank you.
Hanson is a small town in Plymouth County, Massachusetts, incorporated in 1820 and named after Alexander Conti Hanson, a U.S. senator. Maura grew up with her siblings in a modest house there. Hanson has a mix of colonial charm and New England practicality. Wooded lots, small ponds, cranberry bogs, nice, that sounds cool, and narrow roads that wind through town. It's about 25 miles south of Boston, but feels much farther removed. Maura attended Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, where she was a track and cross-country standout. Her church, St. Joseph the Worker, and spots like Ma's Pizza or the track field behind the school, these are regular parts of her life.
Yeah, it's interesting how those early years seem to really define her. She wasn't just an athlete. She was disciplined and driven.
And that drive carried her to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. So now we'll talk about West Point. And it is more than just a military school. It's a whole ecosystem perched above the Hudson River in New York. The honor code is strict, the schedule is brutal, and the expectations are sky high. Cadets start their day around 5 a.m. and they train, study, and march their way through rigorous routines. Maura began as an engineering student there, and she even ran in marathons during her time on campus. But it was also at West Point that things started to unravel a bit. In 2001, Maura was caught in a violation involving stolen makeup from the campus store. It was a serious enough breach of the Academy's honor code that she transferred out soon after.
Yeah, that's a weird one, and we'll dig into it a little bit as we're diving through her story.
I'll hold you to that.
That's a strange one, but it brings us to UMass Amherst.
So I will take you there now. And it is part of a 5-college consortium in the Pioneer Valley. It's a big, bustling campus, nearly 28,000 students at the time. No, thank you. Surrounded by mountains, farmland, and old mill towns. Maura studied nursing there and lived in Kennedy Hall, which, like most dorms, had its mix of academic intensity and weekend chaos. I can imagine.
Oh, yes.
She worked 2 jobs, one as a security monitor on campus and another at the campus art gallery. She also kept running, both literally and metaphorically. Her time at UMass included challenges, a probationary offense for using a stolen credit card to order food, but she was still pushing forward.
And just days before she disappeared, she crashed her father's Toyota Corolla on Route 9 in Hadley. That was February 7th, 2004. She'd been at a dorm party. No alcohol was cited in the police report, but it was another incident in a string of stressful events.
And by February 9th, she was gone. But everything leading up to that, her roots in Hanson, her experience at West Point, her time at UMass, all of it matters. Paints a fuller picture of who Maura Murray really was.
And that picture, as complicated as it is, only sharpens the mystery. So before we go any further, we need to talk about Maura. Not just the headlines, not just the theories, but who she really was. Maura Murray was born on May 4th, 1982 in Hanson, Massachusetts. She was the fourth of 5 children born to Fred and Lori Murray. Her family was Irish Catholic, close-knit, and deeply rooted in the values of education, discipline, and sports. Fred, a medical technician, and Lori, a part-time nurse, raised Maura and her siblings, Fred Jr., Kathleen, Julie, and Kurt, in a modest home shaded by the forest and cranberry bogs that give Hanson its quiet, rural character.
And for folks outside Massachusetts, Hanson's a South Shore town where local pride runs deep. Maura would have grown up running past the cranberry bogs, cheering on her school's sports teams, and attending Mass with her family at St. Joseph's. The community is close, like truly close. People grow up knowing each other's parents, siblings, and cousins, and Maura was right in the middle of it all.
She was brilliant, quiet, fiercely competitive when it came to running. At Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, Maura was a star athlete in cross country and track, earning regional honors. She was also a top student and a member of the National Honor Society. But what stood out more than any award was her determination. If Maura set her mind to something, she did it. That drive took her to West Point in 2000. She enrolled as a cadet and chose chemical engineering as her major. Cadet life at West Point isn't for the faint at heart. Early morning drills, academic rigor, and an uncompromising honor code. For a time, Maura handled it all. She ran marathons, trained in icy Hudson Valley mornings, and kept pace with some of the military's most disciplined minds. But it didn't last. In 2001, she was caught violating the honor code. Specifically, she was involved in a theft incident involving makeup. It wasn't credit card misuse, as some reports falsely claimed. It was a minor infraction by civilian standards, but at West Point, integrity is everything. Rather than face disciplinary proceedings, Maura chose to transfer.
Which brought her back to Massachusetts, to the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she picked up nursing. That shift wasn't just academic, it was personal. Lori, her mother, had worked as a nurse. It was a way to reconnect to her roots and maybe with herself.
At UMass, Maura took a job with campus security, patrolling dorms like Melville Hall, and she worked part-time at the campus art gallery. Her GPA hovered around 3.2. She was on the dean's list. She was doing well, but cracks started to show. The first came in November of 2003 when she was charged with improper use of a credit card. She had used a stolen number to order about $250 worth of food. It wasn't some career criminal move. It was impulsive. She got probation and the charge was dismissed after she met the terms. The same month, she crashed her father's Toyota. A costly accident, over $10,000 in damage, and another layer of pressure. Then came February.
It was cold, mid-teens Fahrenheit, patchy snow and ice, and Maura's world started to unravel.
On February 5th, 2004, she was working her campus security shift at Melville Hall when she received a call. Around 1 a.m., she became visibly upset. Her supervisor, Karen Mayotte, noted that Maura appeared shaken, although not in tears. She walked Maura back to her dorm, and all Maura could say was, "My sister." Whether that call was from her sister Kathleen, who'd recently relapsed into drinking, is unconfirmed. Some have speculated that the call came from her boyfriend, Bill Rausch. Others say it was a different family member. What we know is something was wrong. 2 nights later, in the early morning hours of February 7th, Maura crashed Fred's new Toyota Corolla on Route 9 in Hadley, Massachusetts. She'd been at a dorm party earlier. No alcohol was cited in the report, but it was the second crash in 3 months. Fred came out to help her deal with the fallout, and the bond between them was tight. He described her as his buddy. but he was pissed.
I can imagine.
And as a father, yeah, I would be pissed too, and he freely admits he was not happy with her.
Second in 3 months? I mean, goodness.
Yeah, but they talked and they made plans for the coming weekend, and he left thinking that she'd be okay. And actually, he was there helping her shop for another car. And he was pulling money out of ATMs because he could only get like 500 at a time.
Right.
And so they went looking, and I think that he had pulled like $6,000 altogether, but they couldn't find a car for that. And so he was going to come back and help her go find another car once he had a little bit more money. So
that brings us to Monday, February 9th. Maura emailed her professors to say there had been a death in the family, and there hadn't. She made calls to a condo in Bartlett, New Hampshire, and a resort in Stowe, Vermont. She withdrew $280 from her bank account and stopped at Liquors 44 in Hadley. There, she bought a box of Franzia wine, Bailey's, Kahlua, and a single Seagram's wine cooler. I find that odd.
Right?
She also printed MapQuest directions. Oh man, you remember MapQuest directions?
Oh, I sure do.
One to Burlington, Vermont, and one to Bartlett, New Hampshire. Those details weren't released at the time, but have been confirmed through NHSP files and family accounts. Then she packed her 1996 Saturn, nursing textbooks, toiletries, accident forms, and a printed email to her boyfriend Bill. Some say she also packed a stuffed animal. That detail's often repeated by friends and family, though not officially confirmed.
So she left UMass around 4:30 p.m. and began driving north. 3 hours later, around 7:27 p.m., her Saturn crashed on a snowbank off Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. She was never seen again. No footprints leading away from a car, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just an abandoned vehicle with the airbags deployed, wine spilled inside, and a rag stuffed into the tailpipe. Something her father said that he had mentioned to her because, so her car was basically a pile of shit. And he'll say the same thing. It was a pile of shit, and it was on its last leg, and
just limping it along to get to the new one.
Right. And it was smoking like crazy. And so he had told her, because, out there is like most or a lot of states where they have all the emissions control shit, not like Wyoming where we have none of it. Thank God. But out there, it's all emissions control and everything. And they were concerned that she was going to get pulled over because it was smoking so bad. And so he had told her, hey, I'd heard about this. It probably isn't going to work. But somebody said if you put a rag in the exhaust pipe, then it'll help you, it'll help with smoking. Yeah. You can get past a cop, And so that's where he thinks that the rag idea maybe came from. But, as we dig into this, there's a lot about that rag thing that doesn't fit to me. It doesn't make sense to me, but we'll be talking about it.
Okay, so like John said, that's where the mystery begins. But before we chase the theories, let's reflect for a moment. Excuse me. This wasn't just some college girl. She was a daughter, a sister, a marathon runner, a nursing student. She made mistakes, yeah, but she also had plans. She wasn't fragile. She was trying.
Yeah, I mean, she was a dumb kid. We were all dumb kids at that age, I mean, when I read through the shit that she did, I didn't really shoplift or anything like that, but I did dumb shit when I was her age too. So I can completely understand where this girl's at this point in her life, But she was trying to push through, trying to get home or to start over, trying to figure out what came next. And maybe in those last days, she didn't even know what that would look like. One more thing before we move on. Maura's family never gave up. Fred Murray spent years filing lawsuits, searching rivers, knocking on doors. Julie, Maura's older sister, has taken up the torch in recent years. launching a podcast, advocating on TikTok, organizing search efforts. And in 2024, the FBI reissued a $10,000 reward for credible information in Maura's case. The world has not forgotten, and neither have we. We're headed to the crash scene, the aftermath, the search, the witnesses, and every bizarre, unexplained moment that followed. But before that, Angela, something strange happened just 40 days later, right?
That's right. Just across the state line, another young woman, Brianna Maitland, vanished under eerily similar circumstances. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Fair enough. So, it's Monday, February 9, 2004. Sometime between 3:20 and 4:30, Maura Murray leaves the University of Massachusetts Amherst campus. She's packed her dorm belongings, and she's in her 96 Saturn, a car that she'd been driving despite its known mechanical issues and cosmetic damage. She'd had the two crashes. We know that it was limping along short one cylinder. So the thing is, I mean, it's trashed, but yeah. And so then she stops at a liquor store. She pulls money out of the ATM, and then she stops at a liquor store. And like you had said, she bought Bailey's Kahlua, wine, and a single Seagram's wine cooler.
I'm so confused.
Yeah, I've thought about it. The only thing that I could even begin to make sense of is she's planning on going somewhere and drinking a lot, and she's like priming the pump, although one wine cooler isn't going to do much but make you sleepy, so I don't know.
Maybe it was a random flavor she thought, let's just try that.
Maybe.
Because that's possible.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with that so I don't torture myself trying to figure it out.
Well, don't get ahead of yourself, because with the alcohol thing, there's some weirder shit that's going to come up too. So,
all right.
But her MapQuest printout suggests that she considered both Burlington, Vermont and Bartlett, New Hampshire, but no one knows her exact destination. The drive from Amherst to Haverhill, New Hampshire takes about 3 hours. I mean, give or take it. So it's been done. It took her about 3 hours, but it's other people that have recreated the drive, doing all the stops that we know she did, knock about an hour off of that time. They get up there in about 2 hours. So we don't really know where she spent this extra hour. We don't know. There's a possibility that she like stopped and picked up some accident forms at like the highway patrol office or something like that. There's a possibility that, I mean, and we'll get into all this, but there's also a story that she was seen with two other girls buying more alcohol somewhere else. And there's the possibility that she stopped and got something to eat. Mm-hmm. We don't know, but it took her longer to make this drive than it would really take if you just get in the car and drive But by 7:27 p.m., her Saturn veers off of Route 112, also known as Wild Amanusic Road, and crashes near a tight bend just past the weathered barn corner. The road is narrow, flanked by steep snowbanks, pine forests, and sheer rural quiet. There's no streetlights. The temperature is roughly 15 degrees with patchy snow cover, but no active storm. The crash is first reported by Faith Westman, a local woman who sees the Saturn from her window and places a 911 call at exactly 7:27 p.m. She tells the dispatcher she sees a car off the road and a person, presumed to be the driver, moving around inside or near it. Minutes later, Butch Atwood, a local school bus driver heading home from his route, stops his vehicle when he sees the crashed Saturn. He estimates the time at around 7:30 to 7:35 p.m. He finds a young woman, later confirmed to be Maura, alone at her car. She appears calm, composed, He offers help. She declines, saying that she's already called AAA. Butch knows that there's no cell service out there. He finds her claim odd. Still, he doesn't press it. He gets back in his bus and drives a short distance home and places a second 911 call at 7:43 p.m. Meanwhile, Maura vanishes. Woodsville officer Cecil Smith is dispatched at 7:29 p.m. and arrives on the scene around 7:46. By then, the Saturn is empty. The driver is gone. Let's talk about what they found. So the Saturn, like I said, is a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
It's in rough shape. And by now, the airbags are deployed. The windshield is cracked. There's damage to the front end. The driver's door is locked. The engine is no longer running, though the hazard lights are still flashing faintly. The car has gone nose first into a snowbank, but shows no signs of impact with another vehicle or any other object. And based on the trajectory and the tire marks, it appears Maura may have oversteered or banked suddenly on the curve. Honestly, having been to as many accidents as I have been with the fire department and the ambulance, the way that the wreck happened is weird as shit to me too. So, it's a sharp curve, and you would expect if she lost control, hit a patch of ice or anything, she would have gone off the outside of the curve, right?
Yeah.
She didn't. It's like she cut the curve way too sharp and hit the inside of the curve and then went across to the outside of the curve. It's very odd. It's a very odd accident.
Like
it's not what you would expect.
Correction steering? Freaking out?
I don't know because, we're talking about a little 2-lane road in the middle of freaking New Hampshire.
Fair.
It's not the interstate. So, even if she was speeding coming into that curve, speeding into that curve would have probably been like 40 miles an hour, would have been like hauling ass to try and make that curve. It's a really sharp, like almost 90 degree curve. And like I said, it's a little 2-lane road, and it's both sides are, pine forest and snow. Somebody's not going 70 through there, period. So she couldn't have been going all that fast. So I don't know. It's very, very odd. You see people that miss a turn and end up going straight, but I have never seen a wreck. I'm not saying that there's never been one.
Right.
I've never seen a wreck where somebody's headed into a curve and then turns before they get to it and hits the inside of the curve instead of, it's just weird.
That's odd, yeah.
And then inside the car and on the surrounding snow, investigators locate several personal effects. A partially consumed box of Franzia wine is spilled in the back seat.
Whew.
There's a bottle of Kahlua in an unopened Seagram's wine cooler, a Coca-Cola bottle with a reddish liquid inside, likely wine, Maura's AAA card and nursing textbooks, the printed MapQuest directions to Burlington and to Bartlett, a printed affectionate email to her boyfriend Bill Roush placed atop a box of belongings, her toiletries bag, including contact solution, makeup, shampoo, and a toothbrush, blank accident forms, presumably from her February 7th crash, a duffel bag with clothing, and a rag stuffed into the tailpipe. And, we've already talked about that, but it doesn't make sense here.
Mm-hmm.
And so the rag, it was tested. There was no accelerants or toxins or anything, but let me explain why I say it's very strange that it would be there. First of all, I understand Fred was just trying to help his daughter or whatever, but that shit ain't going to work, period. You can take that rag and stuff it as far in there as you wanted to, and that car's just going to blow it right the hell out. There is the whole, I don't know if you've heard the whole trick, but put a potato in somebody's tailpipe. And if you ram a potato into somebody's tailpipe, it's tight enough fit that it will disable the car because the car can't run if it can't get exhaust out. So the car will die. So there was a theory that maybe somebody had bad intentions, and so they tried to do that, but the reg would have just blown out. So the reg had to have been installed after the crash when the car was sitting there. It had to have been. There's no way that she was driving down the road with that reg in the tailpipe. Absolutely no way. And I say that because I grew up working on cars. I know how it works, but I should also say that there's a documentary where a mechanic where they take the exact same car, the exact model year, the Saturn, and a mechanic drops one cylinder off so that it's running exactly like hers was running, and they stuff a reg in the tailpipe, and then they get the RPMs up to what you would expect at cruising speed, and it does exactly that. It blows the reg right the hell out. So it could only stay in there if it was just sitting there idling. So it's bizarre as hell, unless she wrecked and then was concerned once the cops came, they were going to give her a ticket for the exhaust, which seems like an odd thing to be thinking about at that time. But
very minimal importance at that moment. Yeah.
So the reg is bizarre. And I know that Fred, he kind of takes responsibility for it. And maybe she did get out and maybe she put it in there, but it's bizarre.
Yeah, because who else would have? That was the look I was giving you, was what?
Why would they?
Exactly.
So I think she probably put it in there. I just don't understand why exactly. Unless, like I said, because she knew the cops were coming and she didn't want an additional ticket. But notably, there were no signs of a struggle. There was no blood, no footprints leading away from the vehicle. Though this is complicated by plowing and compacted snow, but there was no footprints that led off into the snow. So let's pause on the timeline here. From Faith Westman's call, her initial 911 call was at 7:27 to Officer Smith's arrival at 7:46. We're looking at a 19-minute maximum disappearance window. Butch Atwood likely saw Maura between 7:30 and 7:35, meaning the window of opportunity could have been as short as 3 to 10 minutes. And I think that it's closer to 5. So in that sliver of time, without footprints, car tracks, or audible commotion, Maura simply vanishes. And I should note, I just throw that out there. I think it's more like 5, but I don't just come by that. I don't just pull that number out of nowhere. So Butch Atwood, like we said, was a bus car driver.
Bus car driver?
He was a bus driver.
What kind of license do you need for that?
A really big one.
Okay.
So he was a bus driver, and he'd gone out, he dropped all the kids off and everything, and he's headed home. He sees her, he stops, asks, needs help. She lies to him, says, I've already called AAA. Then he doesn't just drive home and go in the house and forget about it. He actually goes down and backs his bus up where he can look right at her, and he says that he sat there doing paperwork. I don't know if he probably had like daily logs or something that he had to complete.
How many stops or whatnot.
Yeah. And, I don't know. I know more about like the truck driving rules for DOT. I've never had a passenger endorsement on my license. I don't know if like a passenger driver has similar logs to complete at the end of the day like a truck driver does. They very well might. They might just have to describe their route or whatever, or possibly the school district requires him to log everything, which makes sense.
If kids did or did not get on, or were there extra kids?
Exactly. Yeah, it would make a lot of sense that a school district would require bus drivers to make any notation, just basically note their day and then highlight anything unusual that happened. So, but for whatever reason, he claims that he backed up and was sitting there doing paperwork, and so he can see her. And then there's like 3 different neighbors right there, and they're continually looking out the window and checking stuff out. And so when you go through and you piece all those times together, it really narrows it down to like 5 to, 8, 9 minutes, something like that, Less than 10 minutes is the window that we have for her to disappear.
Right.
So the sheer narrowness of that window and the complete lack of trace, what in the hell are we to make of it all?
I don't know, John. You've got a bend in the road, a handful of observant neighbors, and almost no exit routes that wouldn't leave some sign, especially in February. That part of Route 112 is nestled between thick pine trees and steep embankments. There's no cell service, no public lighting. The silence is natural, oppressive. If someone was laying in wait, or if Maura fled in fear, either way, it's terrifying how quickly the trail goes cold.
And it gets colder. One neighbor, Karen McNamara, later reported seeing a suspicious SUV idling near the scene at the time. Actually, and again, we're going to dig into this, but the SUV that she saw was the one SUV that the police had.
Okay.
And she knew it was 001. That's what that SUV was numbered, was 001. And so there are theories out there that the police chief, who normally drove 001 and had been in trouble for some drunk driving and stuff, that he got there before the other officer got there. Now, that's just a theory, and we'll be digging into all this as we try to mull through this case. But that was the SUV that she claimed that she saw there.
Okay.
Another neighbor, Claude Moulton, was reportedly home but saw and heard nothing. And much later, a local contractor, Ridge Forcer, claimed to have seen a young woman matching Moore's description walking briskly eastbound on Route 112 between 7:30 and 8. His report wasn't filed until months later, and it couldn't be corroborated.
Months?
Yeah.
Why? Do we know?
I don't know. And it's almost certain that it's not right. And I'll tell you why. Because, like I said, Butch had backed the bus in. So he was sitting there doing paperwork. So if she'd have walked that direction, he would have seen her.
Yeah.
And the cop came from the other direction. So if she'd have walked that direction, he would have seen her. And there's no footprints leading off into the snow on either side of the road.
Right.
So there's your four directions, none of which fit. So on February 10th, the day after the crash, search efforts begin. Police, fire crews, and local volunteers bring out bloodhounds, helicopters, and thermal imaging drones. The dogs briefly catch Moore's scent near the road, but then they lose it less than 100 yards to the east, where the road curves again and leads deeper into the forest. The scent trail is the last verified clue of her possible movement. Despite the extensive search, no clothing, no footprints, no blood, no dropped items, no Maura. Officer Smith's initial report suggests no foul play. The New Hampshire State Police pursue a working theory. Maura Murray was an adult who had every right to walk away from her life. How many times do we hear that?
Same old story.
For the first critical days, the case is unofficially treated as a voluntary disappearance, which blows my freaking mind because, you know, like I said, I do have some background in this, being a firefighter and EMT. I pull up on the scene of a vehicle accident and I see airbags deployed and a cracked windshield.
Okay.
First thing I think is I've got somebody wandering around out here with a head injury.
Yeah.
They don't know what the hell's going on.
No, they're allowed to leave if they want.
Yes, well, this looks like somebody would have just wrecked their car and just decided to walk off and start a new life. I mean,
that was the last straw. I'm done.
In New Hampshire, in the winter
time,
who does that shit? I mean, with some of these cases, at least there's the possibility that somebody decided to walk off and start a new life. But when your car is left in the middle of freaking nowhere and you're 2 to 3 hours away from home, you're just in the middle of literally in the middle of nowhere, and you just decide to walk off. I don't know how they ever came up with that shit.
And if you're walking off to start a new life, you leave footprints.
Exactly, or somebody sees you walking down the road. So anyway, they treat it as a voluntary disappearance. There's no crime scene tape, no immediate preservation of the vehicle, no public alert. Fred Murray arrives in Haverhill on February 11th. He begins handing out flyers, retracing Maura's possible routes, and pushing the media to pay attention. He insists loudly that Maura did not run away, that something bad happened on that road. The initial leg in urgency, compounded with jurisdictional confusion and limited resources, because remember, the local Woodsville force has just 4 officers.
Yeah.
And so that creates gaps in the case that have never fully closed. The FBI eventually gets involved, and like we said earlier, in 2024, a $10,000 reward is issued for credible leads. Julie Murray, Maura's sister, launches a podcast and a TikTok series in hopes that it'll reignite public attention, and yet still no trace. Not one confirmed sighting, not one verifiable digital footprint, not one confirmed clue. In the words of many involved, it's like Maura vanished into thin air. But that's not possible. Something happened, and someone, somewhere, knows the truth.
So it makes you wonder, John, how many lives can be changed by 3 minutes on a silent road?
Yeah. And what happens when the trail ends, not with a body or a note, but with nothing? Now we've laid out the timeline, the crash site, and the immediate aftermath of Maura's disappearance. It's time to step into the maze of theories. And there are many.
John's favorite part.
So some are grounded in facts, others are more speculative, and a few that veer into near folklore.
This case really invites that kind of obsessive analysis that John loves. There are just so many loose threads, so many things that almost connect, and others that stubbornly refuse to. But John will try, so let's hear it.
My very best.
Let's hear it.
So we're going to walk through the major theories tonight, just to kind of lay the groundwork. And then as we dive into this case in the next episodes, we'll dig in deeper. And there's some other theories that I didn't list here, some other kind of ancillary theories, but these are the main ones that we're going to walk through. And these have emerged over the last 2 decades, which it's hard to believe it's been that long.
Wow.
It has. From the closest to Maura, who believed that she ran from her life, to those who are convinced something darker happened to her on Route 112, we're going to cover it all. So let's start with what was the original working theory for the New Hampshire law enforcement. The theory that shaped the earliest hours of the case and arguably the direction of the investigation for months. And this was the New Hampshire State Police's initial position in the hours and days after Maura Murray vanished, that she was not missing in the sense that something had happened to her, but rather that she had chosen to disappear. It's known as the runaway theory, and for a time, it seemed to make a certain kind of sense to the investigators on the ground, but as we'll explore, even this simplest explanation starts to unravel under any kind of scrutiny.
And John, it's hard to overstate just how much this early framing influenced the search, or lack thereof, in the critical first 48 hours. Maura's disappearance wasn't treated like a crime scene. There was no perimeter, no police tape, just like you said, just a crashed car on a rural highway and a young woman who, in their view, had walked away from her life.
Exactly. So let's rewind to that Monday, February 9th, 2004. Maura leaves her dorm at the University of Massachusetts with her room packed up. So she's loaded some of this stuff in her car, and then others are left in her dorm, but her dorm is like boxed up, like she's moving. Her boxes are labeled,
Right.
And then there's that email to her boyfriend that we talked about. And she emailed her professors earlier that day saying that there was a death in the family and that she had to leave and go attend to that.
Right.
Which was an absolute lie. There was no death in the family. And so she then withdraws a whopping $280 from her ATM. And that's essentially all the money that she has. She stops at the liquor store, she buys the booze, and, she printed out the directions from MapQuest. So both of the locations, there's Burlington, Vermont, and Bartlett, New Hampshire. They're both about 3 hours north of where she is at. So by 4:30, she gets into the Saturn and she heads north on I-91.
So far, this could look like someone making a break for it. She packs up, lies to her professors, empties her bank account, and buys alcohol for the road. Little odd road trip staples. But if this is a calculated escape, it's a messy one. No major cash reserves, no long-term plan, no one else is known to be involved, and no one, not even her closest friends or family, says she mentioned anything about wanting to leave.
Yeah. And that's what makes the runaway theory so contradictory. It was used to justify the subdued law enforcement response, but even the facts that supported it were more ambiguous than decisive. There's also what came before. On February 5th, Maura had a strange episode while working her security shift at Melville Hall. Her supervisor found her in distress around 1 a.m., silent, shaken, and unable to speak. When asked what was wrong, all Maura reportedly said was, quote, "my sister." That comment sparked all kinds of speculations that the call was about Kathleen Murray, her sister. And Kathleen was a bit of a mess. And she was a pretty bad alcoholic. And then she'd also recently been put on some kind of medication. I can't remember exactly what medication. When we get into that part, we'll have all that information.
Okay.
But whatever the medication was, it was contraindicated to have it with alcohol. So it didn't mix well with booze.
Was it one of those that helps you quit drinking? Like
No.
makes you ill?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not that kind of, it doesn't mix well. It's more than makes you super loopy kind of doesn't
Wonderful.
mix well. So, but then later analysis suggested that the call may have been from Bill Rausch or someone else entirely. We don't know for sure, but my research makes me believe that it was almost certainly from Kathleen. Kathleen admits talking to her on that day. And so the phone call that upset her most likely was the one with Kathleen.
Okay.
And then 2 days later, in the early mornings of February 7th, Maura crashed her father's Toyota Corolla after a party. She told police that she'd lost control near the Hadley intersection. And like we said, there was no alcohol was detected. And Fred told reporters that he was disappointed and he was pissed. But,
Yeah.
he was a father. And so, he was upset. He was disappointed.
Yeah.
But he wasn't like, out of his mind or what. I mean, I know exactly how the conversation went down. I've had the same damn conversation with my kids.
I've had the same conversation with my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. We know the conversation. It's not like you're not my daughter anymore or anything insane. It was just like, damn it, Maura. You've got to get a hold of yourself.
Yeah.
Got to quit this shit.
Do better. What's going on?
I am not made out of money. I cannot continue to buy you cars and you continue to wreck them.
Exactly.
I mean, I know the conversation.
Money doesn't grow on trees.
Yes. And so obviously Maura was shaken by it all.
And then there's Maura's history. In 2003, she faced disciplinary probation for using a stolen credit card number to order food. A total of less than $250. She also faced a disciplinary action during her time at West Point in 2001, reportedly for stealing makeup from the commissary. These incidents have been used, some may say weaponized, by people arguing she was under pressure or even ashamed.
Yeah. And I mean, to a kid, these seem like really big events, but those of us that have made it past this point in our life and we look back, we realize
Like what?
this is what all of us were going through. 95% of us were going through the same kind of shit at this age.
Exactly.
So it's nothing that's just like crazy out of control.
Yeah.
But even these pressures, they don't point to someone walking away from her entire life, especially not in the middle of a freezing New Hampshire winter. Without confiding in anyone, without a support system of some kind in place.
Right.
So let's talk about the crash.
I can't imagine she wouldn't have told a single soul.
Her friends,
Yeah.
even if she didn't want to tell her family, her friends.
Yeah. At least that she was leaving, maybe not where she thought she was going, because she may not have wanted to have been found, but at least that she was considering going somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Like, I can't take this shit anymore.
Yeah.
Comments like that. I've got to get out of here.
I gotta clear my
I
head.
can't handle this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. None
So
of that.
weird.
None of it, at least, that anybody has reported. There are some theories that
True.
all of her friends at college have been keeping a secret for 20 years, which I think is as insane as half the other theories, because
Yeah.
if she has a group of friends, I mean, the difference between 21 and 41 is enormous.
And the guilt would have eaten somebody by now.
I mean, even if you're a 21-year-old that's like, I am going to keep my friend's secret. Now you're a parent. Now you're married. Now you have kids. Now you understand what it's like. Bullshit. I'm sorry, maybe one person, but if there were 2 or 3 people that knew this, what was going on, somebody's cracking by now. I just don't buy it. So let's talk about that crash. Like we said, it happened around 7:27, and Faith Westman called 911 and reported the single car crash near her house. And it was very near her house. She could look right out of her window and just see it right out there on the road. And she says that she can see a dark car in the snowbank from her window. And then minutes later, we have the bus driver, again, Butch Atwood, and he pulls over to offer Maura some help. And she lies to him and says that she's called AAA, which that one is confusing to me too, because regardless of your intentions, you're stranded now on the side of the road. Why lie and say you've called AAA?
Yeah.
So he goes ahead and heads back home. Parks starts doing his paperwork. Sergeant Haverhill Police Sergeant Cecil Smith arrives. And like we've said, the airbags are deployed. The windshield's cracked. The front end shows damage that's consistent with a 15 to 19 mile an hour collision. So like I said, we're not doing 70. And the driver's door's locked and Maura is gone.
And now the window begins from 7:27 p.m. when the crash is first reported to 7:46 p.m. when Sergeant Smith arrives. There are roughly 19 minutes unaccounted for. If we narrow it to the 3 to 10 minutes after Atwood's interaction, it becomes even tighter. And then we have John's theory of 5-ish minutes.
Yeah.
There's no footprints, no blood, no drag marks in the snow, just a vehicle, hazards blinking, still warm from the crash.
And like we said, inside the Saturn, police find her belongings, the wine and alcohol and all that kind of stuff, her AAA card, all of her shits in the car, all of it. And then we've got this weird ass rag that's stuffed in the tailpipe. If this was a planned escape, it was done without critical tools. No passport, no significant money at all, no cell phone activity, and most importantly, absolutely no trace of where she went next.
And no one saw her after that. The woods around Route 112 were searched the very next day, February 10th, with helicopters, thermal imaging, and bloodhounds. The scent trail from one of the dogs reportedly went about 100 yards east of the crash site and then vanished.
There were no digital breadcrumbs either. No debit card activity, no confirmed calls, no confirmed sightings. Her social security number hasn't pinged a single database since that day. So if Maura planned to disappear, she did it freaking flawlessly.
Houdini.
Yeah. She never has contacted friends or family. And it is extremely important to note that her mother was dying of cancer and died after her disappearance. So the idea that Maura would disappear and then
without saying goodbye
and not come back for the funeral.
Yeah.
You know, that would be almost unbearable for somebody. Experts that deal with people that...
She would have to completely just have lost herself. Like, didn't know who she was.
Yeah, like amnesia, which is so freaking rare. It's not even hardly worth mentioning.
But then they'd find her wandering somewhere.
Right. But experts that deal with people that disappear and start their own lives and everything, they say, and this is so true, if you look at like witness protection programs and stuff, what just makes it fail almost every time, if it fails, the reason is they cannot just cut ties with everybody.
Yeah.
They always end up calling somebody, needing to talk to, and I can relate, man. I don't think I'm like the quintessential loner. And I don't think that I could just walk off and never nobody ever hear from me again, never talk to my kids. And granted, I have kids, but even if I didn't have kids, never reach out to my parents again.
Right.
Never. I don't think I could do that. And I'm more of a loner than most people.
And I'd be pretty pissed at you if you did that. Just saying.
There's no worry. I don't.
Throw that out there.
So it's just, it's strange. And I have a very, very hard time buying the runaway theory. So
I don't think I could handle a couple of days, much less 21 years.
Yeah.
21 years is what we said it was?
Yeah. So it was 2004 and now it's 2005. You know, when I made the comment earlier about the difference between 21 and 42 is huge, right? Mm-hmm. So even if this was true, which obviously I don't buy it, but even if it was true, she's a different person now too.
Yeah.
So whatever, you know, the catastrophe of, oh, I got my life's ending. I've wrecked 2 vehicles. Now I've wrecked 3 vehicles in 3 months or whatever. Oh my God, everything. That shit's gone by now.
Yeah.
You know, you're telling me that this girl has watched for the last 20 plus years all these news stories, her dad constantly out there. Fred has been out there constantly begging for answers, trying to get help. Julie, her other sister, has just been out there crazy. You're telling me that Maura hasn't seen that and been like, okay, I've got to at least let them know that I'm okay.
Yeah.
Even if I don't want them to know where I'm at, I've got to at least, you know, let my dad die in peace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't buy it. I just don't.
So, in line with all of that, we've discussed the runaway theory doesn't account for the emotional dimension. She had plans to see her father the day after the crash. She had a relationship with her boyfriend, strained though it may have been. She was studying nursing, a nod to her mom, correct? Yeah. She wasn't, by any credible account, giving away belongings, tying up loose ends, or saying any kind of goodbyes.
Right. Fred and Julie Murray have always rejected the idea that Maura ran away. Julie has spoken openly on her TikTok and podcast about Maura's strength, how she faced stress but never buckled under it. Fred spent the better part of 2 decades plastering flyers, petitioning governors, and filing lawsuits against the state for access to records. A man chasing his missing daughter, not one covering for a runaway. And, you know, Julie and Maura were pretty damn close. They were only 3 years apart in age. And Julie was a track runner as well. Okay. And so, I mean, the two of them were pretty damn close. Yeah.
And the FBI doesn't treat it like a runaway either. In 2024, they issued a renewed $10,000 reward for information leading to Maura's location. Not arrest, not extradition, just her location.
Still, this theory persists because on paper, she did lie. She did leave. And then she was gone. But when you look beneath the surface at the snowbanks, the objects in the Saturn, the lost scent trail, that short little window, it doesn't add up. People don't just vanish like that, not in real life.
Unless, of course, something or someone intervened.
And that brings us to the second theory, one that's far more tragic and far more common in cases like this. What if Maura didn't leave her life? What if she lost it just feet from that highway? So we've talked about the possibility that Maura ran away from her life, but what if she didn't intend to disappear at all? What if she was disoriented, maybe injured, or simply wandering into the woods, succumbing to the elements before help could arrive? This is the death by exposure theory, and in many ways, it's one of the most straightforward explanations. No abduction, no accomplice, just a cold night, poor visibility, and the vast, unforgiving terrain of northern New Hampshire.
And if you've ever been out there in February, you'll understand the danger. That night, February 9th, 2004, it was about 15 degrees. There had been some snow earlier in the day, but not a major storm. The shoulders of Route 112 were icy, visibility was low, and beyond the road, just dense woods, ravines, brooks, and bogs. Nothing but darkness and silence.
If Maura had suffered a head injury, like we were saying, or was intoxicated, scared, or desperate to avoid law enforcement, then it's not hard to imagine her fleeing into the woods on foot. So she could have easily lost her bearings, especially with adrenaline running high. And remember, the Saturn was not registered in her name. It belonged to her father. It wasn't insured. Maura was already on probation for the credit card incident. It's possible that she feared arrest and bolted, perhaps irrationally, but not implausibly.
And the geography plays a major role here. Just east of the crash site, the terrain dips sharply. There's a ravine partially hidden in winter, leading to a brook that feeds into the Amonoosuc River?
Amonoosuc,
I
think.
It's dangerous in the daylight, let alone at night. If she slipped, fell, or even passed out somewhere deep in the brush, she could have died of hypothermia before anyone arrived. Hypothermia can set in within hours, especially if your clothing is wet or your body is exhausted. And Maura wasn't dressed for a wilderness trek, just jeans, a dark jacket, and running shoes.
Let's talk about what was found and what wasn't. The bloodhounds brought in the next day, February 10th, reportedly picked up Maura's scent at the crash site. One of them traced it eastbound for about 100 yards along Route 112 before it vanished. No footprints leading into the woods, no trail across the snow, just the 100-yard line and then nothing.
That's what makes this theory so difficult. If she had wandered off, there would likely be some evidence. A footprint in the snow, a dropped item, torn clothing, anything. But the scene was clean. No blood, no tracks, no signs of struggle or misstep.
Also worth noting, law enforcement, volunteers, and search and rescue teams combed through the area thoroughly. Within 48 hours of her disappearance, New Hampshire Fish and Game launched a full-scale effort. Helicopters equipped with infrared, ground teams with cadaver dogs, a 20-mile search radius. They found no body, no clothing, no trace. And that's not all. Even in the years that followed, multiple private searches were organized. No remains were discovered, not a scarf, not a sneaker, nothing.
So some have argued that snow may have covered her trail, that if she collapsed in a low-lying area, maybe in a hollow or under a tree cover, it would be easy to miss. But even that has limits. Snow melts. Seasons change. 21 years is a long time for absolutely no trace.
There's also the issue of the crash itself. The Saturn hit the snowbank at a moderate speed, like we said, between 15 and 19 miles an hour. Enough to deploy the airbags, crack the windshield, and damage the front end, but Maura's injuries would likely have been very minor if she had any at all. There was no blood at the scene, and Butch Atwood, who spoke to her just minutes after the crash, said that she was coherent and calm, polite, if a little dazed.
This wasn't someone stumbling around with a head wound. She was able to decline help, thank the driver, and give a logical excuse. But she'd already called AAA, even though she hadn't. That suggests some degree of clarity.
So let's consider what Maura had with her. Her wallet? Missing. Her cell phone? Missing. Her backpack and toiletries? Gone. Her keys? Also missing. If she wandered off and died in the woods, those items should be somewhere nearby. But nothing has ever surfaced. Not even her cell phone. No signal, no pings, no digital breadcrumbs.
And we're not talking about hundreds of square miles of wilderness. The immediate crash area was fairly constrained. The road is flanked by trees, yes, but it's also bordered by private property, houses, a few driveways. If Maura had taken shelter somewhere, someone likely would have found her. If she collapsed out in the open, she likely would have been seen.
There's also the psychological angle. If Maura was running from the law or afraid of being caught, it's possible she ran blindly, panicked. But again, her behavior in the crash aftermath doesn't fit the profile of someone in full-blown flight mode. She waited at the scene. She didn't sprint into the woods. She was standing by the car. Waiting for what, though? That's the question.
We also need to mention something called paradoxical undressing, and that happens in cases of hypothermia. People become disoriented and begin removing their clothing, convinced they're overheating. But in Maura's case, no clothing was found in the area. No jacket, no shoes, and none of the nearby residents ever reported finding anything unusual like that on their property.
So we're left with a strange contradiction. On one hand, the idea of death by exposure makes a tragic kind of sense. Cold night, unfamiliar terrain, a young woman alone and under pressure. But on the other hand, every material fact seems to push against it. There's no evidence of injury, no trail, no remains, and no compelling reason to think that she would have fled into the woods on foot, especially knowing someone had already called 911 and help was likely on the way.
It's the simplest theory, but the longer this case goes on, the less satisfying it becomes. Person doesn't just vanish into thin air, even in the White Mountains.
Yeah, and the cadaver dogs are a huge part of this one for me. First, you have the tracks. If somebody walks in the snow, you leave tracks.
Tracks don't just end.
If you're from an area where you don't get snow, believe me, you don't walk through snow without leaving tracks.
Dirt, mud, anything.
Possible. And then you have the cadaver dogs, and they searched all over that area. And if she would have wandered off, she wouldn't have gotten very far before she would have most likely succumbed to hypothermia. That's cold. 15 degrees.
Yeah.
And she's in like tennis shoes and jeans. So she's in trouble pretty quick in that situation. So she's not going 20 miles like that. I just don't see it. And so those cadaver dogs, they would have found her. But even more pressing is unless she like flew for a few hundred yards first, she didn't take off into the woods. And that leaves us with a darker possibility. What if Maura didn't disappear because of a crash or cold or fear. What if she was taken? Because while the death by exposure theory may feel logical, the abduction theories, particularly those involving strangers, account for something this theory never does: the total and permanent erasure of a person from the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
If Maura Murray didn't run away and didn't succumb to the elements, then we're left with a chilling third possibility, one that has haunted her family, law enforcement, and online investigators for over 2 decades, that someone took her. This is the stranger abduction theory. It posits that Maura was not in control of her disappearance, that instead, in the dim, freezing minutes after her Saturn struck a snowbank on Route 112, a predator happened to be in the right place at the worst possible time.
And John, this theory doesn't just live in the realm of speculation. It explains one of the most disturbing facts in this case: how a healthy 21-year-old woman could vanish from a crash scene within minutes, with no trace. No footsteps in the snow, no cries for help, no sign of where she went.
So, let's go back to that timeline again. 7:27 p.m. Faith Westman calls 911 to report a car off the road. She saw a figure moving inside or near the vehicle. There was no mention of intoxication, though that detail was speculated by others much later. And at sometime between 7:30 and 7:35, Butch Atwood pulled up and has his conversation with Murray, and that's when she lies and says that she's called AAA. And so by 7:46, Officer Cecil Smith has arrived, and Maura is already gone.
So we're looking at a window of about 3 to 10 minutes from the last confirmed sighting to the moment police showed up. And that stretch of Route 112 with snowbanks and pine trees lining the road provided cover, isolation, and opportunity.
Exactly. One theory is that someone happened to be driving by. Maybe they saw Maura's disabled Saturn. Maybe they pulled over under the guise of helping her. Maybe they weren't a stranger to this kind of thing. There's no hard evidence for this, but we also don't have any hard evidence for anything else, which is why it still haunts the case.
And then there's Karen McNamara's account. She says she drove past the scene at around 7:30 p.m. and saw what looked like a police SUV nose to nose with Maura's car. But Officer Cecil Smith drove a sedan, not an SUV. That inconsistency raised all sorts of speculation. Did someone impersonate an officer? Was there a private citizen already there presenting themselves as help?
And we can't ignore Rich Forster, a local who came forward months later and claimed to have seen a young woman jogging or walking briskly eastbound away from the crash between 7:30 and 8. His house is only about a mile away. If true, it could mean Maura left under her own power and encountered someone further down the road, but the timing doesn't quite line up, and Forster didn't mention the sighting until months had passed, so it remains unverified.
So who else was in the area that night? That's where it gets murky. Police logs don't show any known offenders in the immediate area. There were no confirmed serial killers operating in Haverhill, New Hampshire at the time. But there was a transient zone. This was a transient zone. Route 112 connects to Interstate 91 and Route 302. Routes used by travelers, delivery drivers, and people just passing through. That's part of what makes this theory plausible.
And then we look at the crime scene itself. The Saturn had front-end damage. And like we said, it's consistent with a very low-speed crash, 15 to 19 miles an hour. The airbags had deployed.
Can you even call that a crash at that point?
I mean, technically, yes, but not really.
Well, if the airbags deployed, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
The driver's door was locked. It had a crack in the windshield, and the hazard lights were flashing. There were no footprints in the snow around the car. Again, just a scent trail that traveled east about 100 yards and then stopped cold. That's where the search dogs lost the trail.
Which many believe suggests she got into another vehicle. If she'd continued walking, the dogs would have kept tracking her. Instead, the trail just vanished.
We've got all the stuff that we've talked about inside the vehicle, and we've got that weird-ass rag in the tailpipe.
And still missing was her wallet, her cell phone, and bank card, none of which were ever used again.
There was no third-party DNA found in the car. Some partial fingerprints were collected, but they were inconclusive. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just a clean crash scene and a vanished woman.
And here's the more chilling part. Police didn't treat this as a possible abduction. Not at first. The Woodsville police force had only 4 officers. No crime scene tape was used. No immediate perimeter was established. No grid search was conducted that night. Because the early working theory was that Maura had chosen to walk away.
That delayed response may have cost crucial evidence. The next morning, search teams used the helicopters, the bloodhounds, all of the stuff, and came up empty. The scent trail, like we've said, it just ended abruptly. And nothing has ever been found in that 20-mile radius that was scoured for the next several days, years, and even decades.
Like she was just picked up by her hair and...
Yeah, I mean...
A giant hawk flew through.
Alien abduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, but I always say that, so I decided not.
So you left it to me this
time? I left
time?
it to you this time. Thank you for
sure.
filling in for me. So some people believe that if Maura got into a vehicle willingly, perhaps thinking it was a ride or someone helpful, she may have been overpowered once out of view. If the person kept driving, they could have crossed the border into Vermont in under 30 minutes.
It's also possible that the person never intended to take her far, that she was taken locally and hidden, which brings us closer to our next theory, one involving a suspect who might not have been a stranger at all. But we can't leave this theory without recognizing how it shaped the public imagination. The idea of a predator lying in wait has become a foundational fear in modern true crime. And for Maura's family, especially her father Fred, it's the only theory that ever made sense.
Fred has always maintained that someone took his daughter. From his earliest interviews in 2004 to his legal battles with New Hampshire law enforcement over withheld files, to his continued search even into 2024, he's never wavered.
In recent years, Julie Murray, her sister, has kind of taken the torch from Fred a little bit, and she's really stepped out on podcasts and interviews and TikToks, and her message is clear. Maura was strong. She didn't just walk away. Something happened, and someone knows what.
The FBI has even renewed interest in the case. In 2024, they offered, like we said, the $10,000 reward for information leading to a resolution. It's a weird move in a case this old, but it's a sign that they still believe someone out there knows something.
We've said this before, but it bears repeating. If Maura was abducted, then the person responsible got away clean. No trace, no witnesses, no rumors, just darkness, snow, and silence. The crash happened on Route 112, a narrow, winding stretch of highway surrounded by woods, some seasonal cabins, and long driveways that snake into the trees. For all its charm in the summer, in February, that road is an icy corridor between small clusters of homes and vast emptiness. And some believe that someone from that very corridor, someone who lived close, knew the landscape, and had the means to act quickly, was responsible for Maura Murray's disappearance. This is what's often called the local perpetrator theory. The idea that Maura didn't vanish into the thin air or walk into the woods, but instead encountered someone who lived nearby, who took advantage of her vulnerability in the moments after the crash.
And John, that's not as far-fetched as it might sound. We're talking about a place where houses are set back from the road. Streetlights are few and far between. and many driveways disappear into dense strands of pine and birch. In winter, especially, things get quiet fast.
So again, that timeline. The crash at 7:27, the 911 call. Butch shows up. He calls 911 himself at 7:43, and the first officer, Cecil Smith, is there by 7:46. So that's a tiny little window, a very short period, but long enough for something to happen if the wrong person just happened to pass by. And as we've discussed earlier, the scene revealed no blood, no footprints, no struggle, and
none of the things.
But that scent trail that ends just 100 yards down the road near our pull-off is a detail that becomes central to this theory.
And it's driving me crazy.
Yeah.
Like literally crazy.
Everybody.
If someone local came upon Maura, maybe while she was walking away from the car or maybe while she waited in the dark, and offered her a ride, she may have accepted, especially if they didn't seem like a threat. And if they lived just down the road, even easier.
There's one name that comes up over and over again in this theory, and that's Claude Moulton. Moulton lived along Route 112 near the crash site. He was questioned by law enforcement early in the investigation, and according to public records and statements, was cleared. He had a nonviolent criminal history, mostly involving property disputes, no charges of violence, no arrests related to Maura's case. Still, unverified rumors began circulating online. A tipster claimed Moulton had once made an offhand comment about Maura being buried under his garage. Others added more detail, saying that he had poured a new concrete floor shortly after Maura vanished. But here's the reality. There is no confirmed record that he poured a concrete floor in 2004. No verified radar survey of his property, no search that turned up anything linked to Maura. Those rumors remain just that, rumors.
And that's a crucial distinction. We can't confuse internet speculation with evidence. Let's say that again. We can't confuse internet speculation with evidence.
And there's so much of it. Some of the shit flat out pisses me off.
Exactly. But it does highlight the atmosphere of the time. A community suspicious of its own, grappling with the idea that someone among them might be responsible for this.
There are other locals who've drawn attention too. Some residents on Route 112 were known to have histories of domestic violence or drug offenses, but no one has ever been charged in connection with Maura's disappearance. An unconfirmed report involved a red truck seen in the area that may have stemmed from confusion with Rick Forster's later tip. He claimed that he saw the woman running down the road between 7:30 and 8, but that was never confirmed, and it came months later. And it's just weird as shit to me. Like, if I witness something like that and I hear that somebody's missing, I'm gonna come and tell it, and
not months later.
And there's no way in hell that I'm gonna remember it months later.
Yeah.
I did see that girl. It just doesn't.
And it was between these times.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no. And no one else, including neighbors like Karen McNamara, who claimed to see a suspicious SUV nose to nose with Maura's Saturn, has provided verified information that led to a suspect. But it's the lack of answers that gives the local theory oxygen. So let's talk about the scene itself, John.
All right. So, we've talked about it several times. We've got the same thing. We've got the car that's wrecked, the driver's door locked, airbags deployed, crack in the windshield, the lights are blinking, and
partridge in a pear tree.
Yeah. We've got the wine, some of it spilled in the car. We've got all this alcohol in the car. We've got her cards, textbooks, all of her shit's in there. The email to her boyfriend. But there's no blood. There's no signs of a struggle. There's no third-party DNA. And the keys are still missing.
And this brings us back to that pull-off just east of the crash site. If Maura walked in that direction and the bloodhound trail suggests she might have, a person waiting in a car there could have intercepted her in a matter of seconds. Especially if they were from the area and knew exactly where to park to avoid being seen from the road.
It's worth noting that NHSP didn't initially treat the case as criminal. They considered Maura a potential runaway, and by the time they began conducting wider searches, any opportunity to catch a local culprit in the act had passed. The area wasn't canvassed that night, which I think is incredibly irresponsible for the reasons that I said before, because you have a potential crash victim wandering around out there. You got to get on that shit immediately. I can't tell you how many late night searches I've been on looking for victims in a car accident that we end up finding out had called somebody for help and gotten a ride, but we treat it as though somebody is wandering around out here injured until we can prove that they aren't. The fact that they just blew this shit off and was like, well, I guess somebody decided to wreck in the middle of freaking nowhere and I don't even know what their thinking could have been.
I just realized we've gotten this far and you've not called anyone an asshat yet.
Well, these guys are asshats.
Thank you.
So they did no house-to-house checks, no roadblocks, and when searches did happen on February 10th and beyond, they included bloodhounds, helicopters, the New Hampshire Fish and Game, and dozens of volunteers, but Maura was gone by that point.
That delayed response has long haunted her father, Fred Murray, who's always maintained that Maura met with foul play, and that the truth likely lies somewhere near where her car was found. Fred's persistence led to lawsuits against the state, demanding access to case files, and Maura's sister, Julie, has since become a tireless advocate, like we said, launching a TikTok channel, a podcast, and amplifying Maura's story to a new generation.
The FBI joined the case in 2023. They had that reward and still no arrests, no suspects, just a deep unease in the community and a growing frustration among those who followed this case for 2 decades now.
Right.
And I'm one of them. This case pisses me off.
It does. So there's another angle to consider, and that's the silence of the town. Haverhill isn't just small, it's close-knit, and people talk. But sometimes they also keep secrets, especially when they're afraid of what speaking up might cost them. There's been speculation that someone in town knows more. Maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a former friend. But in places like this, information moves slowly, if at all.
And that kind of silence is its own mystery. Before we close out this theory, there's one more thing we should mention. Another case just 6 weeks after Maura's disappearance and only 90 miles away.
So now you're talking about Brianna Maitland, right?
Exactly. A 17-year-old girl from Vermont who vanished after her car was found abandoned in a rural area. No sign of a struggle, no trace, and just like Maura's case, Brianna's story has no ending. It's weird as shit, too. It's every bit as weird as this one, if not even weirder.
Yeah.
But we'll come back to Brianna in a later episode. For now, the local perpetrator theory remains one of the most enduring, not because there's hard proof, but because the geography, the silence, and the lack of forensic evidence all leave a terrifying possibility on the table. That someone who knows these woods took Maura and never said a word. Of all the theories in the Maura Murray case, this next one is the most controversial and the most speculative, but it's also one of the most persistent. This is the theory that Maura didn't simply disappear on her own, and that it wasn't just a random passerby or a local predator. Instead, some believe Maura crossed paths with someone in law enforcement, or someone connected to law enforcement, and that her case has remained unsolved because of the initial cover-up.
And John, let's be honest. For a theory like this to take root, there has to be more than just paranoia. There has to be distrust in the process, in the investigation, and in the people who are supposed to protect her, in the asshats you're about to talk.
The asshats, yes. And from the very beginning, this case was plagued by the inconsistencies and confusion, especially around how the crash site was handled. So we've got that timeline, and we're left with just a few minute window where something could have happened that had to be, at the very maximum, we have a 19-minute window where she could have disappeared. And for the reasons I've talked about and we'll go into a lot more depth on, I think it's way shorter than that. That's not just me. Most people think that it's considerably shorter than that. And so what makes some people suspicious? A few things. The crash report itself, filed by Cecil Smith, initially referred to a woman who was potentially intoxicated and possibly fled the scene. Yet, according to Smith's later statements, he didn't actually speak to Maura. When he arrived, she was already gone. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, and no consistent documentation of what he found in the car or immediately around it.
And that's not all. Early on, there was confusion over what vehicle Officer Smith arrived in. Some witnesses, including the Westmans, described seeing a vehicle with no markings, possibly an SUV, not the sedan that was later confirmed as Smith's cruiser. That may sound like a minor detail, but it's taken on a life of its own online. If Smith drove an unmarked SUV, some believe, could it have been someone else impersonating law enforcement? Or could it have been another officer, one not officially logged into the scene?
This is where the theory branches into two competing theories. One, Maura was picked up by a rogue law enforcement officer, possibly someone abusing their authority. Or two, Maura was killed accidentally or intentionally, and the incident was covered up to protect the department or specific individuals. So let's explore. In the first scenario, Maura may have accepted help from someone that she believed was a police officer, especially if she was nervous about her prior accident just days earlier in Hadley, Massachusetts, or concerned about alcohol in her car. The vehicle's hazard lights were still blinking, the airbags deployed. It's not hard to imagine someone pulling up with authority and Maura stepping into their vehicle, believing she'd be safer than standing in the cold. But what if that person wasn't on the up and up?
And if it was someone known in the area, maybe a local officer, maybe someone impersonating one, Maura might not have felt like she had a choice. There are rumors, and again, these are unverified, that some officers or security personnel in the region had disciplinary issues or connections to off-the-books behavior. That sounds shady.
Yeah.
Like drinking while on duty or covering for each other.
So in one version of the theory, the situation spirals out of control. Maura is harmed, accidentally or otherwise, and instead of calling it in, the person responsible hides the evidence. Now, let's be clear. There is no documented evidence that Maura had contact with a law enforcement officer at the scene that night. But the circumstances of the crash and the lack of a serious criminal investigation in the early hours add fuel to the fire. The crash site was not preserved as a potential crime scene. No forensic photos were taken that night. No immediate grid search was performed. It took until the next day to bring bloodhounds, and by then, any scent trail could have been easily lost or tainted.
And here's something else that bothers people. That Saturn had multiple alcoholic beverages in it. We talked about it. Franzia wine, Kahlua, the single Seagram's wine cooler, and a Coca-Cola bottle with red liquid that smelled like wine. And yet, there's no record of law enforcement testing that liquid or conducting a full inventory of fingerprints inside the car. We also know that Maura's cell phone, wallet, and car keys were never recovered. That's not unusual in a disappearance, but it adds to the sense that critical evidence was missed or ignored.
Right. And then there's the elephant in the room, the role of the New Hampshire State Police. NHSP officially took over the case from Haverhill police in the days after the crash, but from the outset, they treated Maura as a possible runaway. According to Fred Murray, they were slow to issue search warrants, reluctant to treat the case as criminal, and dismissive of his concerns. Fred later sued the state multiple times to access investigative documents and crash photos. In each case, the state refused, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. To this day, hundreds of pages remain sealed.
And let's not forget that when journalists and private investigators have tried to look into the department's actions, especially in the early days, they've hit roadblocks. From incomplete records to redacted documents, it created a sense of opacity that only deepens the public suspicion.
Now let's look at the other scenario, that Maura died in an accident, possibly struck by a vehicle after leaving the scene, and that the person responsible was connected to law enforcement, prompting a cover-up. This theory gained traction in 2017 when Fred Murray appeared on the Oxygen documentary The Disappearance of Maura Murray and suggested, quote, if she was hit by someone in a police cruiser or someone connected to the system, they may have tried to make her disappear, end quote. Supporters of this theory point to the lack of physical evidence and the fact that no suspects were ever named, even 2 decades later.
But the critics of this theory say it's based mostly on distrust and not proof. They point out that many disappearances suffer from disorganized responses, especially in rural areas with limited manpower, and that procedural errors don't necessarily indicate conspiracy. It's also worth noting that the FBI joined the case in 2023 and has since offered the reward. If there were systemic corruption involved, some believe it would have come to light by now.
Still, the damage is done. The early missteps, the murky record keeping, the lack of transparency, those things don't just create frustration, they create an opening for theories like this one to take root. And in a case like Maura's, where the trail went cold so fast, that opening has never really closed.
There's one more layer to this. The way Maura's story fits into a broader pattern. In true crime, we've seen it again and again. Young women vanish, and when law enforcement doesn't act swiftly, public trust erodes. It happened in Natalie Holloway's case, in Laura Spears, and in Brianna Maitland's, just 90 minutes from Maura a month later. Whether or not a cover-up happened in Maura's case, the public perception remains. Something went wrong, and no one has been held accountable.
It's a theory that refuses to fade, because even if it isn't true, it feels plausible in a world where authority sometimes fails the people that it's meant to protect. And that, in itself, is its own kind of tragedy. So where does that leave us? We've explored 5 major theories surrounding Maura Murray's disappearance, each with its own set of facts, possibilities, and pitfalls. The runaway theory offers a psychological portrait of a young woman in turmoil, desperate for space, perhaps even seeking escape. But it doesn't explain why she left so many loose ends, or why she vanished without a trace. The abduction by a stranger theory provides the simplest explanation in terms of risk and vulnerability. A young woman alone on a dark highway in freezing temperatures is a prime target, but without physical evidence, that simplicity begins to unravel under scrutiny. Then came the local perpetrator theory, raising uncomfortable questions about proximity and opportunity. Someone who knew the roads, knew the landscape, and maybe knew the perfect place to make someone disappear. Yet even that theory struggles to explain the sheer lack of clues after 20 years.
The intentional disappearance theory is seductive too. It suggests a kind of control. That Maura didn't vanish because of danger, but because she wanted to rewrite her story. That theory raises more questions than answers. Where did she go? How has she avoided every camera, every social security record, every slip?
Or has she? because we will be discussing someone that claims to have seen her in Canada.
Ooh, dun dun dun. And then, of course, the theory that tugs hardest at people's sense of justice, the law enforcement cover-up. It's the most emotionally charged and the most difficult to prove. But the very fact that it exists reflects something deeper, a widespread distrust of institutions built on years of incomplete information, sealed records, and silence.
And if there's a single thread that ties all these theories together, it's this: absence. The absence of evidence, the absence of a reliable timeline, the absence of clear communication between agencies in those critical early days, the absence of closure for a grieving family.
And that absence is why Maura's case still matters. Why people still post on forums, hike up Route 112 with flyers, and light candles every February in her memory. Because somewhere out there, someone knows something. Maybe they've stayed quiet out of fear. Maybe they don't even realize what they saw. Maybe they told someone once and that person dismissed it. But it only takes one tip, one memory to shift a cold case back into motion.
And if you're listening and you know something, no matter how small, you can call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. There's still that $10,000 reward for information leading to Maura's whereabouts. 20 years is too long for a family to wait, too long for a sister to wonder, too long for a father to fight alone. So we keep asking questions. We keep re-examining the evidence. We keep challenging silence, because in the end, this isn't just about theories. It's about truth.
And can I add something here?
You sure can.
If anybody's afraid to call the FBI, get a hold of us and we'll do it for you.
Absolutely. Yep. And so, I mean, this is a good time, I think, to ask. So you were not at all familiar with this case, right?
No, not. I mean, I watched one thing when you told me we were doing it.
So at this point, I mean, we still got a lot to unpack in the coming episodes, but what are your thoughts? Where do you fall on all of this?
I think it's sinister. Something's messy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of messiness.
Yeah, very much so. For me, but you know, I've followed this case for years and years, and so I kind of wanted to get your opinion. So of those theories,
Okay,
which one are you leaning towards?
I hate to say it, but the law enforcement side.
Yeah.
Like somebody pretending to be, or there's a dirty cop somewhere, because sadly we see entirely too many of those. And
Yeah.
this is why you come up with colorful names for people.
Yes, it is.
So that's the one I'm leaning towards. If gun to my head, if I had to choose, that's the one I'm leaning towards, because of no footprints, random vehicles being seen, bloodhound trail ends. Short of aliens, it has to be another car, and it has to be someone she either trusted or thought she had to listen to.
Yep. Yeah, that's, you know, I'm kind of at the same place. You've got Butch Atwood, and he pulls up, and I've got some questions about old Butch, because his story has changed a few times.
You want to talk to him as bad as you want to talk to Mothman?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not psychic, and he's dead, so I haven't as much luck talking to him as Mothman, I think.
I could reach out to a psychic for you.
But he's got, so you've got to ask the question, if she's wanting help and Butch pulls up, why didn't she go with him? Is it just that, because he's a big dude. He's a big, like, Santa-looking guy. He's got a big white...
Thick guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's big, and he's got a big old white beard and kind of longer white hair. I mean, he looks like Santa Claus. He's got that big belly, the whole 9 yards.
In this tight-knit community, though, shouldn't she kind of know him?
Well, she's not from here.
Oh, okay.
She's a complete stranger in this area.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, yeah.
But, you know, if I try to put myself in, first of all, I'm not a woman, so it's very difficult, but maybe I can pick your brain a little bit. But I do say, if I'm in Maura's shoes and somebody pulls up in a school bus, I'm more likely to trust them than
a semi-truck. Sadly, but true. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Or a random car or a motorcycle or, yeah.
Because, first of all, it's a school bus.
It's a school bus.
The county, and I'm guessing here, but I know that 95% of the counties, even in 2005, did background checks and stuff for employees that had anything to do with children.
Yeah, these people are allowed to drive our kids, so I should probably, in theory, be able to trust him.
Right. So you would think if she was going to accept a ride from somebody, she would have jumped in with him and just went to his house. And if she was in a situation where she was going to accept a ride from somebody, why didn't she just walk across the street to the house that was right there?
Yeah.
With the people. Hey. I mean, I don't know. It's just very strange. But with the scent trail, I think we can be almost certain that she walked down. It was like 90 yards, maybe 100, and got into a vehicle. So I've got to ask myself, why did she get into that vehicle? It's either, in my mind, most likely it's not a serial killer, because the chances of a serial killer stumbling on her, I mean, she is not on the interstate.
Yeah.
And I encourage anybody that wants to pull up a map of this and see where it's at, because you got to wind yourself through town, and then you kind of come out of town, and then you start driving out into the country. It's just a two-lane backcountry road. It's not a major thoroughfare that anybody's going to be taking going from point A to point B.
Right.
And so, I mean, the chances of her encountering a serial killer are slim to none. But
how very coincidental would that have been?
Right. But, you do have Israel Keys, who took advantage of situations just like this.
Israel Keys.
And we know that he was active in this area. But
ew, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's so rare. I mean, it's so remote that the chances that anybody, an Israel Keys or any kind of serial killer, stumbles upon this girl and kills her. I don't know. It's possible, of course.
Yeah.
But boy, that's a leap. Possible. Or you've got a local, but what is there to make her trust that local over Butch? Do they have a female with them? Are they closer to her age? Either
are they in a uniform?
And that's the next one that I was going to.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. But just for the local non-law enforcement related, something would have had to make her trust them more than going to a house nearby, or more than going with Butch, who was going home. His wife was in the house. So it's very unlikely that Butch is involved in this, just because, unless his wife is involved too, which, I mean, anything's possible, but that's a pretty damn remote theory.
Are they both gone now? Butch and the wife?
I believe the wife is still alive, but Butch is dead. But something made her trust somebody. And so I could see it. I think I could easily make an argument that if I'm a 21-year-old female and this big, burly, older guy with a white beard and stuff pulls up, I might be a little bit hesitant. But if a younger guy that's a college-age kid like me, somebody I can relate to, pulls up, I might be more inclined to get into the car with him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And then the last one where I'm at is the final one would be the law enforcement connection. Somebody in authority. And as we dig into it and look more, the woman that witnessed the SUV was very clear about what SUV she saw. It was the local police department SUV number 001, period. She is very clear about that.
Right.
Very clear. She knows exactly what SUV she saw. And so there's been some weird kind of changing of stories there to where now Cecil Smith says that he was in that SUV and that's why she saw it. But like I say, we'll dig into that deeper. But I'm not saying this is what happened, but if that is what happened, it would not be the first time that a law enforcement officer has kidnapped, raped, and murdered a woman.
Sadly.
And used their authority in order to accomplish it.
Mm-hmm.
There's been multiple instances of police pulling women over and then taking them to a secluded location and doing bad things. It's sad, but it's true. And so for me, and all of this will become more true as we dive into this entire mess, but for me, it's one of those two in my mind. It is either a local or it's law enforcement or some sort of authority figure like law enforcement, either somebody impersonating law enforcement or actual law enforcement.
Yeah, that's my gut. My gut's feeling that way.
I mean, I am almost 100% certain that she did not run off and start a new life somewhere.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make any sense. So, all right. Well, I just kind of wanted to get your take on that because I know you don't know as much about this as I do. So I just kind of wanted to know where you were sitting, and then
taking the temperature.
We'll probably do that throughout these episodes, and we'll see where it all comes out in the end. But for now, let's step back for a moment from the crash site, from the theories, the timelines, the tips, and focus on the person at the center of it all. Maura Murray wasn't a mystery. She wasn't a theory. She wasn't a case file on a Reddit post. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a student, a talented athlete, a woman trying to navigate early adulthood with all its pressure, pain, and promise. Before she became the missing UMass nursing student, she was just Maura, a real, living, breathing person. She was born May 14th, 1982, the fourth of 5 siblings in a tight-knit Irish Catholic family. Her father, Fred, worked in maintenance and raised his children with a strong sense of discipline and devotion. Her mother, Lori, was a nurse, and Maura was someone who straddled both ambition and modesty. She wasn't loud, but she was driven. She wasn't flashy, but she was fierce in her goals.
And she ran, literally, cross-country track, distance running. That kind of sport isn't about ego, it's about endurance. It's about pushing through the exhaustion and self-doubt, putting one foot in front of the other, even when the road feels endless. That tells you something about her mindset. At West Point, she didn't just study, she competed. She held her own among some of the toughest young adults in the country. And when she transferred to UMass Amherst, she carried that same tenacity into her nursing program.
But she also struggled, like many people do. She faced the same kinds of setbacks so many young adults deal with: relationship, turbulence, academic pressure, job stress, and the feeling that you've let someone down. There was no clear warning signs of a mental health crisis, but there were little cracks. The kind of cracks we all experience when we're 21 and expected to have life figured out. And that's the part people sometimes forget. This wasn't a hardened criminal running from justice. This was a 21-year-old college student in the middle of winter, driving through a rural mountain road alone in the dark. If she were your daughter or your sister or your friend, you wouldn't ask whether she deserved to vanish. You'd ask how the system failed her.
Because the system did fail her. The assumption that she ran away, the delays in searching nearby homes, the gaps in interagency communication, those things matter. Those things cost time, they cost momentum, they cost answers. And for the Murray family, it's been 20 years of anniversaries without Maura, 20 years of looking at an empty chair during Christmas dinner, 20 years of unanswered questions.
Fred Murray never stopped looking. He searched those woods himself, paid for billboards, knocked on doors, filed lawsuits, spoke to media outlets, challenged the state police. He never let go. And Maura's sister Julie has stepped into that same role of advocate, launching a podcast, posting on TikTok, and trying to keep the story alive for a younger generation that may never have seen Maura's photo on CNN, but might hear about her on their For You page. That's the thing about cases like this. They stop being just about the person who vanished and start being about the person left behind. The grief becomes generational.
But so does the love. So does the resilience. So does the drive to make something meaningful from tragedy. Maura's case has inspired advocacy work on behalf of missing women, especially in rural areas where investigations are too often dismissed or under-resourced. It's made people reconsider how they respond when someone disappears. It's taught communities, and even some agencies, that families don't just need comfort, they need clarity. They need facts, and they need follow-up.
So this episode isn't about solving the case. It's about remembering the person behind it. Maura's smile, her strength, her sense of purpose, the way she filled the pages of her life before they were ripped out. We don't know where she went. We don't know what happened, but we do know this. She mattered, and she still matters.
Definitely.
You know, after all the timelines, the roadside theories, the witness statements, and speculation, sometimes what lingers the longest are the silences. The things no one said. The details that never made it to a police report. The moments that might have mattered but were lost to time, error, or apathy. What happened to Maura Murray on February 9th, 2004 remains one of the most agonizing cold cases in America. Not just because of the mystery itself, but because of what it reveals about how easily someone can vanish in plain sight. A car, a curve, a crash, and then nothing. No trace, not a scream, not a clue we can pin everything to. But if you pull back, you start to see the life behind that void. Maura wasn't a myth. She was a real woman, shaped by discipline and independence, but also by fear, ambition, pressure, and possibly shame. She was a promising student, a trained athlete, and someone who knew how to endure pain in silence. And that's important, because silence can be misread, misinterpreted, dismissed. She had a lot on her shoulders that week. Disciplinary trouble at school, a car accident, a fractured relationship with her boyfriend, and a cell call at work that left her visibly upset. Add to that the decision to pack up her dorm, send an email to her professors about a fabricated family death, and head north with snacks, alcohol, and MapQuest directions to both Burlington and Bartlett. And yeah, it's fair to ask, was she running? Maybe she was, but if she was, then what was she running from? And what, if anything, was she running toward? Some say she was planning to die by suicide, to disappear intentionally. Others believe she was escaping an abusive situation, and still others argue she was simply taking a break, a few days to breathe and reset, only to collide with a predator or a stranger on Route 112. All these theories carry weight, but none carry certainty. What strikes me most after all these years is how small the window of possibility really is. 19 minutes at the most is all we have. A 19-minute span between Faith Westman's call and the first officer on scene. And in that time, a woman who was smart, resourceful, and determined somehow vanished in the cold New Hampshire woods. You look at that timeline and you realize it wouldn't take much. One person, one vehicle, one bad decision, and the rest is decades of not knowing. But here's what we do know. We know Maura loved her family. We know she was trying to make something of herself, and even if she stumbled along the way, we know her disappearance wasn't just a moment of chaos. It was the culmination of pressures that were slowly building until something gave. We know that even the most composed people carry burdens that we don't see, that a 21-year-old college student might smile at a track meet one day and silently plan an escape on the next, that a bright future can dim in a matter of minutes, and that some roads don't lead back. But we also know that the people who love her never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never stopped asking hard questions. So maybe that's where we leave it for now. Not with closure, but with commitment. Commitment to keep telling her story. Commitment to push for better systems that treat every missing person as worthy of urgent care, not just passive sympathy. Commitment to remember that behind every case file is a human life, messy, complex, and worth fighting for. Maura Murray deserved more than mystery. She deserved truth. And that's our job as journalists, storytellers, and human beings to keep asking for it. So that's going to wrap up this episode of Dark Dialogue. We've spent this time walking the snowy shoulders of Route 112, combing over timelines, crash scenes, scent trails, red trucks, family interviews, and missing phone records. And yet, even now, Maura Murray's story remains out of reach, like a voice just out of earshot, echoing through those dark New Hampshire woods. But here's the thing. We don't tell these stories because they're easy. We tell them because they matter.
And because someone out there knows something. Maybe they didn't come forward in 2004. Maybe they didn't feel safe. Maybe they thought their detail wasn't important. But silence lets cases like this grow cold. So if you've heard anything that might help, don't wait. You can submit a tip through the New Hampshire State Police or contact us directly. We'll point you in the right direction.
And like we say every time, we're not just voices in your headphones. We're part of a community of listeners, researchers, and advocates determined to push back against the darkness, one story at a time.
We also want to remind you that this is just the first in our series. In our next episode, we'll be diving deeper into the theories.
That's right, Angela. So after this, we're going to dive into each one of these theories and pull it apart by the strings and just see what unravels and what holds together. We've given a brief overview of the theories, but there's so much to say about each one of these theories that probably each theory is going to get its own episode. I don't know yet, but as I write on, we'll kind of make that determination. Maybe it'll be a couple theories per episode. Maybe it'll be one theory per episode. I don't know for sure how it's going to come out, but I do know that we need to now dive into this case and see where it all shakes out at the end.
Okay. So as a reminder, you can find source links, case maps, transcripts, and bonus content at darkdialogue.com. You can also support the show on Patreon, Ko-fi, or subscribe to our Substack for behind-the-scenes updates and early access to new series.
And if you've got theories, information, or personal stories to share, send them our way. Email us at info@darkdialogue.com or message us on our social media platforms. Every voice counts.
Thanks for traveling this road with us tonight.
And until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and keep the dialogue alive.